My name is Bernhard Mohr, and it's a great honor for me to chair this next panel. So thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this truly great event. And to chair this highly interesting panel discussion entitled Cultural Trials. From Pussy Riot to Oleg Sentsov to Kirill Serebrennikov, Russian cultural life is punctured with political trials. The accusations may seem absurd, but the prison sentences are more than real, and no one can consider themselves safe enough. Marked as terrorists, treated as criminals, targeted for public shaming. Who are the people behind the headlines? And what is the hidden logic that makes the cultural trials a part of the bigger picture? To cast light on these questions and help us get a better understanding of the challenges that artists and publicists face in today's Russia, we have an outstanding panel consisting of 3 other countries' most prominent writers and journalists and critics. Just 2 lines about myself. I work as an editor of translated fiction at Cappelen Damm in Norway, so I publish fiction books from all over the world. And I've worked a couple of years in publishing in Russia as well, and also written quite extensively about Russian politics, economics, and culture the last years. To the far right, Maria Stepanova. She's one of the main organizers of this conference. She was also introduced this morning, but that's a few hours ago, so I'm gonna introduce her again. She's a poet and essayist and the founder and editor-in-chief of the independent online journal Kolta.ru. 1 year ago, she published the much acclaimed documentary novel Pameti, or Post-Memory, that has been nominated to several of the most prestigious literary prizes in Russia, and it's under translation to around 15 languages, yeah, more or less. To the left of her, in the middle, so please give her a big hand again. In the middle, Katherina Gordeeva. She is a journalist, documentary filmmaker, and a cultural entrepreneur, known for a series of documentary films on NTV from 2003 to 2012, when the challenged editorial policies forced her to stop the collaboration. In August this year, she published a documentary film on the stage and film director Kirill Serebrennikov, who for 1.5 years now has been held in house arrest. Katherina also very recently released a new book called Vremya kolot led, or Time to Break the Ice, together with actress Chulpan Khamatova, and she just arrived because yesterday she presented the book at a non-fiction book fair in Moscow. So please give her a big hand. And finally, to the left, Marina Davydova. She's a theater critic, since 2010, the editor-in-chief of the journal TEATR, and the artistic director of the Net Festival. She's also the curator of the performative installation Eternal Russia that has been recently showing in Berlin, among other places. She has published several collections of articles, the last one being Kultura Zero, or Zero.
It's not article, it's a book.
It's a book, a collection of articles, yes. Очерки русской жизни и европейские цены, Culture Zero, Notes on Life in Russia and on European Stages, a book that came out this spring. Please give her a warm welcome. We will do this in a similar way as the earlier panelists. First, the panelists will make each a short talk, around 10 minutes each, and then we will turn to conversation. And towards the end, the last 10 minutes or so, the audience will get the opportunity to add their comments or ask questions. And we'll do this in the opposite direction as compared to what the program says. So please, Maria.
So thank you, Bernhard, and thanks to all of you for being here. And what I'm going to do is I'll try to show how the so-called trials on culture, how they are fitting into a bigger picture and what is the meaning behind the bigger picture. There is a footage from 1930s showing us the close-ups of people gathered to watch one of the first public trials of Stalin's era, the so-called Prompartia, process Prompartia trial. It is hard to grasp the facial expressions, the strange blend of excitement, sometimes cruelty, sometimes compassion, sometimes hope. Now, in the times of social media, no one is excluded from the show trials, the court cases that are specially designed as a brand of state propaganda. And everyone is witnessing the process and being watched at the same time. Among the dozens of different court cases that have an obvious or not so obvious connection with political life of contemporary Russia, the so-called trials on culture are among the most visible ones. Being pure examples of injustice, they have a quality of a fable. One doesn't have to be an expert on Soviet history to be reminded of the purges and executions of Stalin's times. Artists and film directors are getting jailed for no obvious reason. The similarity doesn't pass unnoticed. Thus, the state officials are doing their best to avoid comparisons of that kind, and even the President Putin is becoming a part of the game. There was a press conference where Putin was answering one more question about Kirill Serebrenikov's trial. And what he said was he doesn't see anything unusual about the case. It is just an ordinary criminal thing. If it was, I'm quoting, a persecution and not an investigation, Serebrenikov's production wouldn't appear at the stage of Bolshoi Theater. This rhetorical technique, describing an unusual story as something ordinary and the political case as a criminal one, is a regular practice in contemporary Russia. It is used even in the rare cases when the defendant himself demands to view his doings in a political context. For instance, on a November night in 2015, a political artist, Pyotr Pavlensky, entered the Lubyanskaya Ploshchad in Moscow with a can of petrol, and he put on fire the closed door of a central entrance of the FSB building, the mansion where the Russian secret police is situated for around 100 years. An imminent punishment was a part of Pavlensky's project. There is a video documenting his actions, and an artist is standing with an empty can close to the burning doors, waiting to be arrested. Pavlensky was insisting that he has to be tried as a terrorist. It was his way of supporting Oleg Sentsov, the Ukrainian film director that was accused in terrorism and jailed for 20 years for the similar thing. The state is claiming that he put on fire the doors of the Crimean office of the Russia United Political Party. But in spite of Pavlensky's insistence, the prosecutors proposed to treat his actions as ordinary vandalism. And then, after thinking it over, they reformulated it as the, I'm quoting, destruction or damage of a cultural heritage object. And the prosecutor gave an explanation. In the 1930s, the important cultural figures were jailed in this mansion, which of course makes it a heritage object in need of protection. But the case of Pyotr Pavlensky, as well as Pussy Riot or Oleg Sentsov, were, so to speak, kind of predictable. All of the accused were meaning, each in his own way, to confront the state. The well-known case of Kirill Serebrennikov that we are facing these days is something else. He didn't belong to the opposition, at least in a straightforward way. And all Moscow for over a year is trying to detect the real reason behind his persecution. There has to be hidden reason. But it seems that one may be sure that whatever the hidden reason is, the most important one was in his doing his duty as a director. He was simply doing his work. And a famous stage director, an example of well-deserved success, is losing everything, including his freedom, because of the accusations that seem wild, unmotivated, inexplicable, and very public. It is hard not to read it as a message, something to be delivered, a message sent by the state, and the society is expected to grasp the meaning. And that is something that is happening more and more often. We fail to notice how often. The Russian public is witnessing public arrests and trials that have no direct explanation. They cannot be explained by the accused's confrontation with the state. Sometimes they are even known as loyalists, as successful people well knowing the code of behavior one needs to survive in current political circumstances. Some of them could be even called liberals, for instance, the Minister of Finance Alexei Ulukayev or the former governor of Kirov's region Nikita Belykh. Both of them were suddenly arrested and accused of bribery. And there is a lot of others, politicians, officials, siloviki, people that were sometimes even Putin supporters from the very beginning, and there seems to be no obvious political reason behind the arrests. They are just disappearing one by one from different social stratas. Or also ever so often a person is being arrested and tried for something totally insignificant. An ordinary person, no one remembers the name, they are living somewhere in the distant provinces. And they are accused in extremism for sharing in the social media some picture or a joke, something that is being considered by the state to be over the margins of normal behavior in the social networks. The victim is usually chosen at random, but the process itself seems to be meaningful. But what the meaning is, how does the system work? What is the mechanism behind the choices? Someone is accused in bribery, but if all the system is corrupt and all the others are staying safe, why this particular person had been chosen? This one belongs to the opposition and still stays free, and that one is doing the same and he is being jailed for years. My guess is the meaning is there is no right way of behavior, not anymore. No codes or rules that are granting you safety. Both guilt and innocence stop making sense. Your own personal choices are not determining your future. It is a sort of a lottery, and the state is making it quite clear. The state is now defining everything, the crime, the punishment, and who is considered to be guilty. The citizens are not allowed to control the process or even understand its logics. It is designed, specially designed to seem unpredictable. Now the Russian society lives between two contradictory images of the state and its mode of existence. The first one, that everything that is happening in contemporary Russia is well planned, strictly controlled at the tiniest detail, and all the decisions are being taken somewhere at the upper level, and that every arrest or a street accident are parts of a bigger plan, a well-planned operation of fighting dissent. And there is another notion, also quite convincing, that there is no state control anymore, not at this stage, and that all the mad initiatives, from unlimited use of military force to the wild, erratic legislation, are just a number of someone's personal choices, sometimes fatal. In fact, there is no real difference. What is pretending to be a wild, crazy, chaotically working system of self-destruction is, in fact, a machine that is producing fear and alienation in largest quantities possible. And in my opinion, it is more effective than in Stalin's times, because, of course, you can execute citizens for a political joke, but you also can victimize the whole society using the cheaper methods. Instead of jailing millions, you can simply keep them scared and make them endlessly guess who is going to be the next, what to do to avoid persecution, is there any reasonable way to stay safe. So it no longer matters who is owning the machine. It is working well enough on its own. The Russian state doesn't need loyal supporters, not anymore. It is quite comfortable working with people who are too scared to do anything at all. If the Russian state has a political ideal, it's a complete stasis, the population that is kept frozen to complete immobility. No arrangements, no privileges, no way of belonging to a certain elite works anymore as a safety tool. The future victims are being chosen from every social strata, as if the authorities are trying to make the message clear enough. You don't have to be innocent or guilty or involved in politics to become a subject of a political trial. And that's a new reality Russia is facing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for this highly interesting and enlightening, although grim, introduction. We will get back to some of these points afterwards, but let's just continue with Katherina Gordeeva. Please take the stage.
Hello. I'm going to tell you some personal story, and the story is considered to be an evidence to the process we are here to speak about. My name is Katherina Gordeeva, and I was born in a small city on the south of Russia. The title of the city is Rostov-on-Don. And I was born and I raised next door to Kirill Serebrennikov. We attended the same school. He was older and he accompanied me at the same school every day. Kirill had to become a secret engineer, and he's supposed to work in a secret factory because he was brilliant in studying physics and mathematics. But he wanted another life, and he became a director of the student theater of our small town. And I was a journalist of the first Rostov-on-Don independent newspaper, and that's why I made his first interview in this newspaper. We were friends, we have the same views, same interests, and a lot of common friends, but we never spoke about politics. It wasn't that interesting for us, or we had many other things to discuss, I don't know. At the end of the 90s, we each moved to Moscow. Kirill became the most celebrated young theater director of the time. I became a TV reporter and host. I hosted a weekly late-night show on NTV. NTV is the biggest broadcasting company in Russia. In 2006, I became the trustee of the Gift of Life Foundation, the first and the biggest charity foundation in Russia. Co-founded by Chulpan Hamatova, she is best known internationally for the starring in Goodbye Lenin movie. Probably you know. At that time, she played a leading role in Kirill Serebrennikov project. The title is Naked Pioneer Girl, Голая пионерка. This performance by Serebrennikov was immensely famous and discussed production. So our paths crossed all the time. In the same 2006, Kirill Serebrennikov directed the first live concert in Russia, live charity concert in Russia. Together we raised more than $200,000 for the children suffering from the leukemia and other cancer disasters. Although I would not say that we met in Moscow often, we were always in touch and still did not pay attention to politics. We discussed creative questions, our careers, plans, etc. In May 2012, I quit NTV channel because of censorship problems. I was put on the blacklist of every TV channel in Russia, and being honest, at that time I had zero chance to find a job. It was Kirill Serebrennikov who lent me a hat who lent me a hand. He hosted my open lecture, my new open lecture project in the Gogol Center Theater, where he was a chief. So the new life began. I interviewed truly great people such as President Gorbachev, writer Ludmila Ulitskaya, astronaut Alexei Leonov, and film director Alexander Sokurov. Thousands of people were free to communicate with my guests because all these interviews was open. And it was open and public could come to this interview and participate in this. Open lecture was an education and all over the Russia projects. We made open lecture in St. Petersburg, Ekaterinburg, Perm, Ufa, etc. But this my project was banned by the Special Security Department. Once people in masks appeared in the library in St. Petersburg, and we knew that new trial against us started. We didn't know who started this trial, but in Russia it is this very frequent situation. So once again I had to restart my life, and this time as a freelancer journalist and a civil activist. I could never have imagined that my documentary about Kirill Serebrennikov, about my friend Kirill Serebrennikov, would be watched on YouTube by 300,000 people. This documentary covers not my friend's great talent, but his criminal case against him, but the criminal case against him called TEATR case. I'm sure that this case is 100% political and absolutely absurd. I interviewed Kirill Serebrennikov for the first time in 1993 in Rostov-on-Don. The second interview happens last year, 2 months before Kirill Serebrennikov being arrested. He said, "The solitude is the most powerful test a person can go into." This interview was the first time he spoke about the political situation in Russia, because the politics became important in our life, even you were a musician, a director, a doctor, or journalist. 2 months later, mask wearing from the Special Security Department came to arrest Serebrennikov also in St. Petersburg. You know that this is the native city of Russian Revolution. 9 months after Kirill was arrested, I made a documentary about the TEATR case, and the point was to explain people what had happened. The only conclusion I made is that if you create in Russia and you believe you are absolutely free, you are wrong. Russian authorities think all your dreams, all your vision, all your performance belongs to the state. The state has the right to control you also because it gives you money for a project and because your living space is their country. The money they invest on your project is their own money. The country you live is their own country, as well as you are their own property. This is what the TEATR case is about. I think so. A few weeks ago, I finished my book titled Time to Break the Ice. This book covers such issues as Russian charity and Russian civil society. The TEATR case is the cross-cutting theme of this book. We are all suspected as soon as we have an intention to be free, to love our country, to dream about the future, the state despises it. All these ideas constitute a criminal case nowadays. This is so much about cultural trials we are here to speak about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katherina. I could perhaps add, from watching your movie about Serebrennikov, just a couple of the facts. So he was arrested in August 2017. He's been in house arrest since then, and he was not even allowed to part with his mother, who was dying. They didn't let him out for that either, and he is allowed to leave his house once a week, right? As long as the investigation is going on.
No, he has 2 hours every day.
2 hours every day.
2 hours of walking.
And he's not the only one that was involved in this Platforma project that has been...
in general, the 6 persons: Kirill Serebrennikov, Alexey Malobrodsky, Yuri Itin, and Sofia Apfelbaum. And the 6th one is Nina Maslaeva, who is the financial director.
She's a person from accounting
Accountant,
department.
yes.
She's the chief of accounting department. And the 7th person is Ekaterina Voronova. She's outside Russia. She was lucky, yes. She had a possibility to leave Russia the last day it was possible.
Thank you. Okay, and then the last presentation, please, Marina. Yes, you can sit and you can use the microphone. You have to hold the microphone then.
I'm sorry, because of some problems with my back, I'd prefer to sit. Sorry. So I'd like to, my speech will be kind of continuation of what Maria Stepanova told you. So first of all, I'd like to say that there's no censorship in Russia. An official at the highest level will be repeating to you a mantra about its absence, and from a formal point of view, he or she will be right. We have no censorship, but we do have some performances forbidden for censorship reasons, and a director arrested because of the same thing. Such is an amazing logic of Russian life, because the law, any law, and life as such are two parallel realities in Russia. Actually, we can see it in our past. For example, Stalin's constitution of 1936 was known to be one of the most democratic in the world. It declared the freedom of conscience, speech, press, and meetings, as well as inviolability of a person, but it was very hard, if possible at all, to find in Stalin's Russia a person whom this constitution helped to keep the immunity. When there was the trial of Pussy Riot, many people forgot about it, but it's very important. The law on protection of religious feelings didn't exist in Russia yet. But that didn't stop the court from sending Tolokonnikova and Alokhina into prison for 2 years. And controversially, on the contrary, when the law had already been adopted, Konstantin Bogomolov, the ideal husband, it's our very famous director and the very famous performance. So you still can see it on the Moscow Art Theater stage. So this performance had been performed in the heart of Moscow, and a half-naked girl was crucified, just like Jesus Christ, on the stage, which is real blasphemy. But it was possible to see this performance. It was like parallel realities at the same time. Western people are accustomed that everything has its own rules. And if the rules are terrible, you have to live under terrible, horrible rules. And if they are great, follow the great rules. And it is impossible to live as if rules don't exist at all. In fact, the creepy aspects of the rule of law, when the law is brought to absurd, are described by Franz Kafka. But in Russia, contrary to the popular belief, we are dealing with with anti-Kafkian world, in which the law doesn't mean anything. It is not brought to the absurd, it's replaced by it. And Kirill Serebrennikov's case is a very good example of this absurd. You know, everybody from the street cleaners to the academicians know life in Russia is not regulated by national regulations. It is governed by something very different, by complex vertical and horizontal relationships, by the fight between different groups, by short-term interests of specific influential people. That's why, in relation to Russia, it's difficult to talk not only about censorship, but, which is more important, of course, about ideology. You know, in Nazi Germany, anti-Semitism was openly declared by the state, but in Stalin's Russia, it was called euphemistically struggle against cosmopolitanism. So it's a very, hypocritical way of living. And this hypocrisy we still have in our life. It's very difficult to catch Russian politicians and Russian life, because it's really a kind of phantasmagory. So the discrepancy of any political declaration and what is behind it was the main feature of Soviet time and the feature of Russian situation now. Another feature is that aesthetics is now in the center of politics. And I'd like to remember not Serebrennikov's case now, because I think we will talk about it a bit later, but another, maybe you've heard about it. It's performance Tannhäuser after Richard Wagner's opera, staged by rather young director Timofey Kulabin in Novosibirsk Opera and Ballet Theater. You know that the performance was banned practically. This case seems to me, it seems to be very simple. It's just a clerical attack on secular values, but actually it's not so simple. Here's I just will give you a quotation from chairman of Synodal Information Department of Russian Orthodox Church. It's Vladimir Ligoida. His name is Vladimir Ligoida. Ligoida's opinion might actually be considered as the official position of Russian Orthodox Church. So Ligoida strongly disapproved of the performance of Timofey Kulabin, which, according to the old Russian tradition, he hasn't seen, of course. Like as Soviet writers, they used to start their speeches about Boris Pasternak. I haven't read Dr. Zhivago, but I strongly disapprove of this novel. So it's interesting that Ligoida didn't tell about blasphemy in Tannhäuser, which would be logical, but he spoke about the artistic aspects of the performance. Now the quotation. Professionals who have already seen the production noted that it is an insult to Wagner. Everything is distorted, and it has only a distant relationship to this great opera. Our church doesn't fight with art, just the opposite. It tries to protect it. Today, we are in a situation when we need to defend Richard Wagner, Ligoida informed the public. Just imagine a conservative Catholic who defends Boccaccio from an ethical point of view, or the Protestant priest who brings up a lawsuit against the wrong interpretation of Friedrich Schiller's play, for example. It is nonsense not only for any normal country, but for any normal church. However, it do okay for Russian Orthodoxy, and not only for Russian Orthodox Church. The sacralization of art forms and the transformation of the classics into icons that we need to pray seems to be a symptom of a disease which is rather difficult to name. We live in a very strange society in which nostalgia for the Soviet atheistic past coexists with increasing role of the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church defends the German composer who has never demonstrated love of orthodoxy. The ideology of this society only appears to be solid and monolithic. In fact, there is no ideology at all, neither religion, nor the ideals of socialism, no coherent nationalism, no even the imperial idea can have a claim on Russia today. But the general direction is still evident. What is happening in the country, I would call it total conservative revolution that occurs in different segments of the society. It is always the victory of the conservative trend over modernizing one. The traditional values and spiritual ties at their core in Russia prevailed in every part of cultural and social life. Russia is unlikely to turn into a clerical state. It is unlikely that the ideology of Nazism will triumph completely, and to take the country back to the communist past will be also difficult. What will happen? Just a sticky mess of retrograde ideas of different shades and colors, a gradual but steady transformation of the country in a conservative backland, and creeping conservative revolution of mediocrity without coherent ideology, but almost always with shared aesthetic preferences. Such preferences are the easiest way to express the general request for the conservative eternal values. It reminds me the year of 1929, the so-called year of the Great Break. In this year, an intensive cultural life of the 20s, the Soviet avant-garde, came to an end. No, not the total end, of course, but I would say it was the beginning of the end, and was replaced by the new conception of culture, realistic and patriotic. In fact, starting with 1929, our socialism had an obvious rightist turn. It was Stalin who first turned classics, by the way, from Pushkin to Tchaikovsky into icons. Nowadays, classic culture is actually becoming the new state religion. I'm sure that the fascist ideology grows out of the fascist aesthetics. It is no just coincidence that Hitler and Stalin hated avant-garde and struggled against it. And in Germany, it was struggle against degenerate art, and in Soviet Union in the 30s, they struggle against formalism, but it doesn't matter, it's only names. Fascism is not a concentration camp, not only repression. It is a total victory of an aggressive Philistine taste, this fear of the future and all attempts to break through the future. This is a desire to resurrect the past and try to live in it as in the present. A noble society remembers the past, lives in the present, and thinks of the future. Russian society now remembers the past, lives in the past, and thinks of the past. And this, not the Colonel Putin, is exactly the problem of the country.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these utterly interesting presentations, but you definitely give a very, very grim picture of what it is to take part in Russian cultural life today and to be an artist. You describe a situation which is more absurd than the plot of a Kafka novel in a way. But I want to ask you first, Maria, you said that in describing the Serebrennikov case and what kind of example that states, you say that the state wants to give a notion that it decides everything. It starts criminal processes that are in a way designed to be, the information coming from the state is designed to be contradictory. But what does really the regime want to achieve by all this? Is there a thought-through strategy or not?
You know, Maxim Trudolubov in the beginning of our conference was mentioning the hybrid regimes. In fact, while we were drawing a definitely grim perspective of current life in Russia, we have to admit that on a certain level, Russia, or at least Moscow, is a impressive, comfortable, sometimes beautiful place to live at. And the peculiar combination of comfort and horror is something that is defining our everyday life. I will remember the feeling, it was in the middle of summer, and we were sitting with friends in one of outdoor restaurants in the center of Moscow in the middle of a June night after a number of vernissages where when a crowd of beautiful people were gathered around us, drinking white wine, moving in different directions. And I was thinking that the new reality we're facing is structured this way, as if in a moment an invisible hand could appear out of nowhere, taking this or that person at random from the celebrating crowd. And it would be treated as a normal thing. No one would even notice anything. And that's the general feeling I have towards the whole frame.
But how does this then influence you as a publicist, as a writer? Has the Serebrennikov case changed the way people think about what they're going to write and publish?
Well, I hate to admit it, but currently the Russian state, the authorities, are no more interested in literature. They do care about theater and about movies, definitely, sometimes about contemporary art. But times have been changing from the times of Pasternak or Mandelstam. Now, I would say no one is censoring our poetry or prose, at least to the moment. You never know how it will turn out the next day. But still, right now, literature is not considered to be important.
Because the reach is smaller than cinema, theater, journalism?
I think so. And maybe there is one more thing. The authorities, the people who are behind the current construction of the Russian state, are not the avid readers. They watch movies, they maybe go to the theater if the performance is fashionable enough, but they do not read.
It's interesting to hear you compare what's happening today with the conservative revolution. You used that word, Marina, and you compared it to what happened in Soviet Russia in the 20s and the 30s. And the conservative revolution you describe, would you say that this is something which is being enforced on the Russian society from above, or do people in Russia in general support it?
To my mind, yes, they are ready to support it, and actually, this 18 years of Putin's regime, they are not so homogeneous, and I sometimes compare it with the theater production. Just imagine that you are sitting in the audience, and there's a curtain on the stage, and all the time we can see big letters Putin on the curtain, but when it rises up, we will see which performance we will see there. You never know. So, and it's one thing. And another thing that actually I told already that there's no, to my mind, any ideology in Russia. Just the only idea of our authorities is to keep power as long as possible. The only idea which rule their own lives. And for this, they are ready to use all the ideological slogans, mottos, statements, which they need at the moment. For example, during Dmitry Medvedev, which was also a reincarnation of Vladimir Putin, so since 2008 to 2012, there was a modernization trend in Russia, and it's very interesting to read the documents of the Ministry of Culture of that period, because every second word there was innovation. and every third phrase was, we need new forms in art, you know? And then when Vladimir Putin decided to be elected for the fourth or third term, even for the fourth term, so he understood, and the prices for the oil just went down, and the economical situation became not so good. So for him, it was at this moment it was easier to use different slogans and different mottos, and so it's a new performance behind this curtain started, and it's. Again, it's very interesting that in the Ministry of Culture, all these documents, they were more or less the same, but only they changed the word innovation into the word tradition, for example, and use these new forms into old forms or traditional forms. You know, it was a backlash of this modernization, and I'm absolutely sure that Kirill Serebrennikov became a main victim of this new conservative revolution, because he was an embodiment of this modernization in art scene and cultural field, and at the same time, you know, theater is a very special art where all the people which live in Russia need to use a lot of budget money. It's not so easy to make such a process about a writer, a poet, or so on, because they are not dealing with budget money. But theater field it's so convenient for doing such a big process. So it's very logical for me, you know. Because Serebrennikov is really a symbol of this westernized and modern art. And he is an artistic director of Gogol Center, so he got really money from the state. So,
do you agree, Maria, that he's a victim of a revolution, traditional revolution?
Well, definitely, but as it always goes with the Russian state, you're having to deal with layers and layers of different meanings. Of course, Marina is totally right, and Kirill is an embodiment, a symbol of westernized new theater, of the innovations in theater and in cinema. And of course, he is the obvious choice to become a scapegoat. But on the other hand, which is also quite important, I really think that the main message of the state is that no one can feel himself or herself safe enough. So it is a show trial, also in the sense of making the state of things, the state of affairs, quite obvious.
It's a message that you should do not challenge anyone with your art. Is that what you were saying?
Well, my guess is the idea that no one is putting into words, but still, that doing nothing is the best choice. You are not to become too visible. It is being dangerous.
To be active is dangerous.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And there's no censorship, but there's a lot of self-censorship, of course, which, yes, it was provoked by this process.
And any kind of, any kind of a normal activity is becoming a sort of activism. It is an easy path.
Katherina, in your presentation, you told your personal story and that you grew up in the same town as Kirill Serebrennikov. You sent me an excerpt of your book that recently was published that I read, where you and Chulpan Ramatova discuss your generation of artists and journalists and intellectuals, and you write that you came to Moscow in the late 90s full of hope and ambition, and you were making careers, and then I quote, "You ended up smashing your heads on a concrete wall of the new reality." And you also write, I don't remember if it's Hamata or you that say this in the book, but you say that you fear when those in charge retire, the political elite and the cultural elite, perhaps people in their 60s today, they will not be replaced by people from your generation, but by people who are in their 20s today. That they will skip over your generation and that your generation failed to grab the initiative. And you also say that yourself, your generation of intellectuals and writers and artists, you are to blame yourself that you were not able to pull the country in a more liberal direction. Could you elaborate a bit on that? And what should you have done then? Where exactly did you fail?
I think that we thought that the freedom is a kind of gift. It's a goddess gift, and we took this gift and we continued to live our own life. We continued to make our stories, make our performance, to write our books or something like this. That's why I said that we didn't speak with Kirill. We didn't speak about politics. We didn't discuss it. We didn't think that the politics is very important. No one wanted to participate in politics. No one wanted to have a deal with it. We wanted to do our own business. It means books, theater, etc. But we never wanted to go to the demonstration. We didn't want to participate in activism. And the message the authorities sent to this young generation is not to participate too. They doesn't have freedom like a goddess gift, but the authorities send them message that do not participate and you will be safe. That's it.
The role of the intelligent in the forming of the Russian society, that's an old discussion, Marina, isn't it? The discussion about the role of the intelligentsia, that's an old discussion in Russia, isn't it? The intelligentsia's responsibility, so to speak, to take part in the development of the Russian society. Do you agree with this, that more should have been done at some point?
It used to be, yes. Russian intelligentsia was responsible for the future of the society and so on in pre-revolutionary Russia, and then maybe the first decade of after revolution. But nowadays, I don't think we can do anything. Actually, I try to be honest. As for me personally, I consider myself as a part of the rather small minority in the country, which has rather different aesthetical and sometimes ethical preferences, and which try to live in this majority among other people. And my main idea is that we have to save ourselves just to survive there, just to survive. And then, if we survive, maybe we will do something. But first, we have to survive. You know, it's the main point.
I'll ask one more question, and then I'll give the word to the audience. This one goes to all of you, I guess. I want to ask a question from the perspective of culture itself, if that's possible. I work with books, with fiction, and for a person who tried to navigate in the contemporary Russian literature, what comes to the forefront all the time is not the quality of the writing, the books themselves, but all the political cases, the trials of culture. I haven't done the research, but I think if you try to count how many news stories have there been, for instance, in Norwegian media about the Serebrennikov case, the Yuri Dmitriev case, the Pussy Riot case, I am sure they by far outnumber the number of reviews of contemporary Russian films and Russian lit books, etc. So from my perspective, it's difficult to find new great writing from Russia because all you get are these stories, you know. So could I ask, what does this do? Do you agree? What does all these cultural trials do to the position of contemporary Russian art internationally?
Okay, thanks, and thanks once more, because it gives me a chance to add a few words to what Marina was saying, because after having said all that we did, I think there is a necessity to add something. That, of course, we do feel as if we were belonging to a certain victimized minority. But I'm more optimistic than Marina, maybe because I'm a writer and I don't need to be funded by the state. It's different with directors. But still, the minority we're talking about, let's speak about, for instance, people who were explicitly voting against Putin at the elections of 2012. It was this 16%. And if we start counting, this makes some 12 million, 15 million. I'm awful with maths, but the figures are, we start counting in millions. That's a lot, in fact. And those are the people who are openly confronting the authorities. For me, it is something that gives us a definite feeling of hope for the next generation, maybe, but still it is hope. And as for the book market, I have a dream.
That's my topic.
Yeah, and Irina, I can only thank God for the existence of Новое литературное обозрение, as well as a very small number of independent publishing houses that are still dealing with the quality literature, with humanitarian disciplines, with poetry. It is really something rare and very brave, because it is being done in a climate of the right turn that is happening not only in Russia, but everywhere else. And it is ever so important. But speaking of the book market, I have a dream. I would love to read more books written in Russian that are treating our reality not as an exceptional case, not as something very important, very peculiar, existing on an island, and you have to be very educated, very highbrow to understand what is going there in this mysterious Russia. For me, Russia, and definitely the Russian literature, is a part of a bigger picture again. It is so very interwoven with the Western literature, the European way of reading and thinking and writing, that I would love to read more books that are written in Russian and still are aware of a bigger context. I think it would be quite important.
I just wanted to clarify my statement, because I always I remember the announcements which we can hear in the airplanes. In the case of emergency, please put on the mask first on you, on yourself, and then on your child. And really, we now in the situation if we want to save our society and our culture, we need to put the mask first on ourselves. And it's a very simple statement, but sometimes people don't understand it. And because culture is some people which do culture. And at the same time, it's very important to know that cultural life until now is still very, very intensive in Russia, especially in theater field. I think for literature, I am a member of jury, and I also found a lot of interesting books this year. But as for theater, I can say it for sure, because I know the situation, that there are a lot of very interesting performances that still appear there and here and so on. And but it doesn't mean that it will continue like this next year, for example. All the time we have to do some special efforts to save it. I mean, I can name you a lot of situations where we have to struggle, and we do it, It's all, I was talking about it.
And I just want to add some words to the point of money for the theater. Let's imagine how much does it cost the process against Kirill Serebrennikov. 25 people wearing these black masks. 1.5 years of the process, 300 books on his case, and a lot of people who have to accuse him, who have to defend him, who have to participate in this case. How many theater performances we can imagine for this money? Huge. Yeah. And you know that society likes shows, and I think the most popular show in Russia right now is the prisoner show. And people like it.
This is court drama.
Court drama, yeah. That's it.
Then we have around 10 minutes for questions from the audience. Please look out for the microphone and introduce yourselves, please, and keep it rather short. Thank you.
I think it's not a question but a comment. I hope I'll be not too long, because now if we start quarreling with each other, I quite agree what you're just telling. That's a really dramatic situation. First of all, I think we can explain this episode. It's quite explainable, because if we look at the generation which is now at power, it's the people of the 60s and 70s. What happened, and had been studying this post-war Soviet society, what happened at that moment when this Soviet ideology, the attraction of this ideology started fading. People became oppositional to the regime, but in two different directions. It was not only so-called liberal opposition of the westernized people, but also from this so-called nationalistic type, which considered the Soviet power becoming too mild. So what we can see now, this is the clash between the one and the second part. In the 90s, there was a predominance of the people who owned the liberal opposition. Now we have these nationalists who are just trying to get revenge for themselves. In a way, in the 70s, people tried to find some new basis for their beliefs. So there were quite a lot of mysticism just spreading, idolation of the pre-revolutionary Russia, interest in conservative thinkers because they were banned by the Soviets, and an interest in the immigrant literature, which was not very innovative, I would say. On the contrary, it was rather conservative, in a way denying the new Russia. So nowadays, in this new context, we can see all these traits which look very absurd. It's true. But this is my generation. I can guess and see all this different, in these new configurations. And one more thing, I would not agree that people react to the strange trials or that's possible disappearance as a norm. On the contrary, just not long ago, the Memorial Organization was a very quiet, that's organization, the historians were dealing with unified names in a way. Strangely enough, in the last years, in spite of all the pressure, there is a more and more public attention to the Stalinist trials and much more interest among younger generation in a way. So I think, on the contrary, people stop reacting to all these repressions with the state as its own right. It's not a norm. That's, you know, just one funny episode. Just recently, we have a very interesting project of these alternative guides around Moscow. And it was 1,000 steps with Kirill Serebrennikov, where you go through Moscow streets, listening to his voice and his story. So at the end of the guide, suddenly a person to whom I just in some military form came up to us, it was 3 of us, and say, "What are you doing here? Why are you just here into something? You should come with me because it's forbidden." My reaction as a former Soviet person say, no, it's just, you know, we're just listening to something else. But the younger generation, you have no right. You have no right to stop us. We didn't do anything wrong in a way. And I think it's quite an interesting case.
Thank you. Would anyone like to comment on that comment?
I guess I will. As a kind of a footnote, that's a wonderful thing about this new generation, and that's a good reason to feel hopeful. But when it comes to memorial, I have a feeling that we are extremely touchy. The Russian society is extremely touchy, not only the intelligentsia, not only the intellectuals, but different stratas are very sensitive when it comes to the events and names of the past. And someone is preferring Ivan the Terrible or Stalin or whoever and defends his own icons. And of course, the intelligentsia is remembering well enough all that was happening in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and etc. But unfortunately, when it is coming to the political trials of nowadays, the population of the protest meetings or people gathering around the courts is not so huge. We can compare people that are gathering around the Solovetsky stone every single year at this return of the names action, and what is going on around Kirill Serebrenikov's case. And for me, it makes a difference. We are much more eager to defend the past, and we are rather reluctant to face the present time. But maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know.
You can see quite a lot of small trials of some young kids for reposting some things, and more parents, by the way, are involved in defending the children.
Yeah, the Mother's March was quite impressive.
One more question here. We have time for both of you. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Paul Flather. I'm from Oxford and the European, which is a club of universities which greatly supports the Fritt Ord and the New York Review. Thank you very much for sharing these moving and shattering stories, really. And I'm just wrestling with this puzzle because I guess we can't see culture as one of those safety valves that I think Bill Tauman was suggesting is being used by the regime, because if it's randomly picking out victims, you're always living in a state of fear. I feel also that maybe, although you said it's very reported in the Norwegian press, maybe we aren't doing enough to publicize these cases continuously. And my question is really that the internet does allow you to talk about the hardships and the victimizations that you get. And the question really is whether there is a degree of hope through the spreading of the message of how the state acts. I mean, is that a feasible, are seeds being sown to show the kind of negative, oppressive manner in which the state operates, and so the kind of message of protest and continuation is somehow being sown. Can I just share one anecdote, which I'm prompted by Maria, because I'm probably one of the few people who's been arrested and spent a day in the Lubyanka. but maybe more. Just to say, if it is a building of cultural natural heritage, the inside is as disgusting as the outside. Just corridors and lots of small rooms with no windows.
Sounds quite awful.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask a question to Maria, because if you look at the website, culture.ru, it's impressive and it's cosmopolitan and it's progressive. But one assumes that you're having to make decisions all the time about how far you can go, you know, what the red lines are, and that if you go beyond them, the probability of the website being closed down increases. So can you give, without being too specific, the kind of calculations you're having to make?
Well, I guess that's one of the most serious problems the editor of any independent media is facing during the last 6 years, because it used to be different before the Putin's return, and now the state is issuing new laws that are specially designed to prevent media from being independent. And of course, you never know what perspectives you are facing. And well, I have to say that our website never was persecuted, maybe with one small exception that is more funny than scary. I was subject to a penalty for publishing a few lines from a Russian poet who is, as the law says, using obscene language. And for these 3 or 4 lines, we had to pay some 10,000 rubles, around $100, which was a bit too much in my perception, but still. But taking it seriously, you never know what may lead to the closing of the magazine you're editing, of a channel, TV channel you are investing into. And in this area, the perspective is also rather grim. And I know it well enough because Culture.ru is a crowd-funded site. And it is one of the, as far as I know, it is the only Russian side website with such a huge audience that is 100% crowd-funded. We don't have an advertising department, and we are getting paid by our readers. And I have to say that some of the investors, not investors, they are just donators from our board of trustees, were withdrawing their support during the last 5 years because of the political reasons, because it is dangerous to support independent media in current Russia. So to finish with it, no, we never were put under any serious level of pressure by the state. But of course, there are some red lines, and we are making small steps across the line, but everyone does. Yes, and back. There and back again, yeah.
Can I add some words? Because, you know, maybe the fact that my case may be more representative, because I'm an editor-in-chief of the journal TEATR, which is dependent on the state somehow. And we really had a big pressure from the state. They tried to close, not to close the journal, but to fire me as an editor-in-chief. And due to Irina Prokhorova, we still exist. But I'd like to say that my strategy is take as much freedom as you can at the moment, and you will survive, and you can win. because we made really crazy things. And in July of 2014, we published a special issue devoted to Ukrainian culture and theater with colors of Ukrainian banner on our cover, which was a really big crime at that time. But one day, these people from the Ministry of Culture, they decided, so she's crazy. Let us not pay attention to her. Let her do what she wants. And it's one of the possible strategies, to my mind, to be brave. Just to be
one
brave.
more thing.
We are unfortunately running out of time. Before I ask you to join me in giving a big hand to Maria, Marina, and Katherina, I would recommend everyone to, let's give them a big hand. Yeah. I would just come with a recommendation, and that is to see the film Leta, which means summer, about two of the main rock legends of the Soviet Union, Viktor Tsoi and Mike Naumenko. It's directed by Kirill Serebrennikov, came out last year, and it was edited on a computer without connection to the internet at his home. So see his films. They are available. Thank you very much.